Veterans are unique individuals. They understand purpose. They understand how to accomplish things. They are task-oriented. They are mission-oriented. And you couldn't ask for greater people to run for office.
This is the My Campaign Coach podcast, where we talk about how to win elections. Every week, we let you hear straight from the best consultants, operatives, and candidates in the game, all for one reason: to help you win. For more information about how we can help you win, visit mycampaigncoach.com. Now, here's your host, Raj Schaefer.
Welcome to the How to Run for Office podcast from My Campaign Coach. This week I get to talk to a friend of mine named Tom Lucero, who has a huge amount of background in political consultation, small business and entrepreneurship, working campaigns all over the place, as well as doing software and database businesses. He's even spent 3 years on the radio in Northern Colorado, so he has more time behind the microphone than I do. Today we're going to be talking about a lot of cool stuff that we normally talk about from the campaign and political background side, but we're also going to get the chance to talk about a subject that's near and dear to both Tom and my hearts, and that is veterans, specifically how we get veterans more involved in politics. I'm a big fan of seeing more veterans coming home and getting involved in the politics of their states, municipalities, and country. And I believe that we need more running for office, and we need more that are registering to vote and just getting involved somehow. And Tom is doing some great work on that front that we're partnering in and kind of as strategic partners in some of this work. So without further ado, Tom, welcome to the podcast.
Glad to be with you.
Well, it's a pleasure to have you on. And let's start out, before we get to talking about the great work you're doing, helping support veterans, let's talk a little more about your story and what you've been involved in.
Where do you want to start? Do you want to start in 1974 when I spent my formative years not watching cartoons, but watching the Watergate hearings?
I do. Much like myself, you never had a chance. You got indoctrinated early. We'll kind of hit 2 times speed going through some of those early years. But give us the rough breakdown. Where'd you come from? How'd you get involved in politics? And then eventually that kind of started to take on a much bigger role in your life. So let's kind of go through some of that history.
Well, it's interesting, Raz. Grew up in a very political family in the Denver metro area. My family had been involved in politics way back when my great-grandfather headed up the Democrat Party in northern New Mexico, instilled that sense of get involved with all of his kids. When my grandmother came up to Denver, she got involved. So it's in my blood. It's a passion, always has been. And I am considered one of the few black sheep of the family because everybody is politically active in my family, and they're all Democrats with the exception of a handful of us who are Republicans. And so it's been great. I've always had support from my family. I support them. Even when I ran for office, I always got campaign contributions from Democrats, and they were always my family members. But I really got active in 1992 when a little-known think tank, people know it in Colorado or across the country, the Independence Institute. I interned with college and really got that understanding of free markets that I wasn't getting in my economics classes in college, really understanding how government works, how obtrusive it is in our lives. And I got involved with them in a statewide ballot initiative. And I thought, here are these group of activists who were making a difference. I might actually want to do this or be involved some way, somehow for the rest of my life. And that's really where my activism started in 1992.
That's pretty cool. So you got involved there on the local side with the ballot initiative with the Independence Institute. And then kind of what was next for you? It obviously sparked a real love of politics and getting involved in these trench warfare battles. But where'd it go from there?
Well, I went to work for a candidate who was running for governor in 1994, unsuccessful. 1996, I ended up working for Bob Schaefer in a 3-way primary, Colorado's 4th Congressional District, won the primary. Bob went on to become the congressman. And at that point in time, it was interesting. Young family starting out, the gyrations of a campaign lifer's life where you're unemployed for potentially 7-8 months out of the year till the next campaign comes around. that's when I jumped into the private sector and really started my life as a businessman, entrepreneur. But 1998 came around and I had an opportunity because one of my big passions my entire life was education and the value that education played in my life. And here in Colorado, we're one of only 4 states in the country that does this. In every other state, the governor appoints the governing boards for the flagship university. So in Texas, for example, where you're from, the governor gets his appointments. Those individuals oversee the University of Texas. Colorado, Nevada, Michigan, and Nebraska actually elect their regents, as they're called in those states. And I thought, this is a wonderful opportunity for me. It's a part-time position. It doesn't pay. It's volunteer. I can focus on my entrepreneurial endeavors. And I spent the next 12 years of my life as a member of the Board of Regents here in Colorado, fighting conservative values, how to change the curriculum, how do you get conservatives on campus. We had some successes. We hired some Republican presidents, former United States Senator Hank Brown, former head of the Republican Party, Bruce Benson, is now the president at the University of Colorado. So we can make a difference in higher education. I proved it. They're proving it, the Republicans here in Colorado. But it allowed me to be an entrepreneur and still remain actively involved and make a difference.
I like that. Yeah, I'm kind of unfamiliar with the way some of those other states work that you mentioned, because here in Texas we do have them all appointed. But given some of the problems we've seen on the Texas state, the Texas Regent side, maybe we ought to be moving more in that direction.
And it's interesting because just a side note, because one of the things that we're going to talk about here in a little bit, Raz, is about getting politically involved. If you look at who gets appointed to governing boards, when governors have appointments like this, and we're focusing on higher education, who gets appointed? Big money donors, guys who have access and they leverage that money. They make donations, they raise a bunch of money, and then the governor comes back and appoints them. Here in Colorado and Nevada and Michigan, and I missed the other state, Nebraska, individuals can make a difference, and it's not about how much money you have. It's about how much dedication you have and running a campaign. We'll talk a little bit about that as well. There are many ways for people to get involved politically. Unfortunately, a lot of powerful positions in government are filled with people who pay to play. In essence, they leverage their net worth, their money, their friends, their resources, and they're in it for the prestige. And don't get me wrong, I know a lot of these individuals and they believe they're doing the right thing, but the right thing isn't necessarily what you and I would be doing, what they believe the right thing to be.
Well, you're just going to get a different type of person, different backgrounds, and different passions when you talk about having a very low barrier to entry and running a campaign for a regent position versus a very high barrier to entry. We were talking about having to donate a whole lot of money to a gubernatorial campaign to be considered there. So I think there's definitely a lot of interesting effects, or results rather, of those differences. So as you got onto the Board of Regents, you were building your entrepreneurial background and doing a lot of great stuff there, making some money, raising your family. And then as time went on, politics started taking on a little bit bigger and bigger role for you, right?
Sucks you back in. What is that famous scene from The Godfather? I try and get away and they suck me back in.
I'm with you.
So seriously, it's always been a passion. 2008, got a unique opportunity. Had just gotten out of the restaurant business, sold my restaurants to my share in the restaurants to my partners. Got involved with a statewide ballot initiative. We took on the unions here in Colorado, and we won. It took 4 weeks after the election to finally count the votes. That's how close the election was. Eventually, we got shut down. in the Supreme Court, which led to an entrepreneurial endeavor, software database related, trying to bring political campaigns into the new era. In fact, actually, I think I've told you a story before. Back in 1996, so boots on the ground, actually working in campaign, I went 12 years from 96 to 08. And in 96, we didn't even use email.
Right.
Watching the evolution of political campaigns in my lifetime has been fascinating. So it allowed me to maintain connection with political campaigns, trying to help them from a software database standpoint, which ultimately led to the iteration of where I am right now. Consult a lot of campaigns on software, on database. Got to have the right data. You need to know who you're talking to the right voters. And from a technology standpoint, you have to take advantage of technology in this day and age. But ultimately, as you know, Raz, too many candidates, especially on a close grassroots level, state legislature, while I'm saying data and technology is important, nothing can do away with the old Lincoln saying of know who those voters are and get them to turn out. And that's the hard work, the blocking, the tackling, knowing those voters, talking to them, looking them in the eye, and getting them to cast their vote for you. Unfortunately, to a certain degree, technology has become a crutch for some candidates running for office. They don't want to do the hard work. It's hard work.
Yeah, Tom and I are both big fans. If we actually believe that there were silver bullets out there, we would love to find them and then sell them. But the fact is that they aren't. It really does come down to the hard work. And like I said, the blocking and tackling, the going out and knocking on doors when it's too cold, when it's too hot, when you're too tired, having conversation with voters and listening well beyond the point when you feel like it. These are things that you got to do. And campaigns are not often terribly sophisticated. It just takes a little bit of hard work. And especially when you're talking about some small races here and there, you have the ability to go, if you believe in what you're selling, to go and win these elections by doing a couple things really well and just working hard. And if more campaigns do it, we'd see a whole lot more conservatives getting elected.
Absolutely. And the other miserable work of a campaign, picking up the phone, calling your friends and family and asking them for money, and other people and strangers. It's hard work, but it is very rewarding. It's winner take all. And it trust me, I've lost twice in 2 elections, won twice. Winning's a whole lot better.
Man, I tell you what, I heard what's now my favorite example of why folks got to be ready to dial for dollars. Former Congressman Jim Ryan, our mutual friend Drew's dad, we had him on. It'll be once this published, it'll be last week on as far as the podcast, but I did actually record it today on the same day as we're recording here with you. And he said, look, it's if you're a candidate that doesn't want to make calls for money, it's like wanting to be a basketball coach that doesn't recruit new players. It's like it's part of the job. If you actually want the job of being a basketball coach, you got to be willing to go recruit new talent. Otherwise, you're going to be an awful basketball coach because your team's going to suck. If you're a candidate that doesn't want to go dial for dollars, then you're not really wanting to be a candidate. It's part of the thing. If you believe in the principles that you keep talking about, you got to be willing to go do the hard work side. And that's all that dialing for dollars is. But if you're not willing to go do that, you're going to be a poor candidate.
Absolutely. And I'll tell you what, one last story, and this is kind of segueing to where we're eventually headed here, Raz. So at the end of 15, my state legislative seat came open. It was going to be an open seat, and I decided one last swan song, I'm going to run for the state legislature here in Colorado, and dedicated the next 6-7 months of my life. And the first 2 months, I did nothing but fundraise and raise in Colorado. So it's all relative. $400 max contribution you can take from any one individual. So very low threshold, but raised just over $30,000 in a few short months, which catapulted me to the top of Republican fundraising for the state legislature in the state of Colorado. But it was 3 hours in the morning every single day, and then going out and talking to voters at that point in time. And I lost the primary by 300 votes, and we've done the post-mortem on it, post-mortem on the race, and fundraising wasn't one of the issues. There were some other interesting dynamics at play, but if you're going to be a candidate for office, it literally becomes a full-time job. And after losing the primary, I got a call from the Trump campaign, and they wanted me to head up outreach and veterans outreach in the state of Colorado. And that was a tremendous amount of fun. And so that's how I spent the year 2016.
So coming off of 2016, you obviously had one loss that really sucked and one big win with the presidential campaign. And you got to meet somebody named Oz Geist. His first name's Mark Oz Geist. And that name's going to be familiar to a lot of listeners. It was to me because he was one of the survivors of the 2012 attack in Benghazi, where we lost Ambassador Stevens and 3 other Americans there. He helped write the book 13 Hours. You may have seen the movie. It's an incredible portrayal of what happened there. But he and his fellows survived, and they were heavily involved in some of the veterans outreach. So you got to know Oz through work with him, alongside him during 2016 on the Trump campaign, right?
Yeah, absolutely. So Oz is based here in Colorado, in Colorado Springs. In fact, interestingly enough, he grew up in southeastern Colorado in the Rocky Ford area, and has made his home in Colorado his entire life, except for his time in the service when he was a United States Marine. As you know, the saying, once a Marine, always a Marine. So he's still a Marine. But Oz was helping us with veterans outreach here in Colorado, in addition to serving as a national surrogate speaker for the Trump campaign. And it was interesting because the Trump campaign had a list, and a charge for veterans outreach was, we've got tens of thousands of veterans all across this country, hundreds of thousands of veterans who aren't registered to vote. We want you guys to focus your time, effort, and energy on helping to get those veterans registered to vote. And as you know, Raz, with a campaign, you only have so much bandwidth. And when you're in the late summer months, July and August, and voter IDing, and then pivoting to turn out the vote and get out the vote related to activities in September and October, we didn't have the bandwidth to focus on the veteran voter registration that we wanted to during the campaign. So Oz and I got together in December last year, and then again early in 2017. We said, you know what? This should not just be an election year activity when we have a presidential election every 4 years. We really ought to take out the veterans side of things from the political sphere of, Republican and Democrat. Let's focus on getting all veterans registered to vote. And again, when we do voter registration, we're not throwing away Democrat voter registration cards or just registering Republicans. We're registering all people to vote. But on the veteran side, we need all of these guys to register to vote, and we don't care. Republican, Democrat, Green Party, Libertarian, what you register as. But step one in making a difference politically is casting a vote every single year, off election years, school boards, city councils, on election years, state legislature, the state legislature, county commissioners, sheriffs, and then every 4th year for president. And these guys need to get active. They need to get involved. We see the stories day after day, veterans not getting access to the health care that they deserve, veterans having to fight for the benefits that they have earned. And it's fascinating when we watch what's playing out in this country with a lot of the identity politics and people saying, well, they're not paying attention to our issue. They're not paying attention to our issue. It's fascinating because of all of those groups saying we need to be heard. There's only one group that has been willing to sign that blank check to say, I'm willing to fight for every American's freedom, to protect those freedoms, and ultimately, if need be, to give my life for those freedoms. And their issues aren't being heard. There are 20 million veterans in this country. That is a powerful voice that has not been tapped into, that needs to be tapped into. And Congress and politicians all across this country need to hear from those individuals. And Mark and I said, nobody is out there doing this. We need to do it. Let's take on this challenge. Let's get veterans registered to vote. Let's also help strategically partner with individuals such as yourself, Raz, who are doing the grassroots work very well, who have services to be able to offer, to consult with folks who decide they want to run for office, to help them run for office. And let's get these guys on the playing field. And it's a shame to say that these individuals who have been willing to give of their time, effort, and energy and risk it all for their country, we are now having to call on them to get politically engaged, to get what is frankly owed to them and what they deserve.
Well, it's a battle all across America to get more and more people involved, as so many people are being jaded by politics. And a lot of our men and women in military service or veterans have more reason than most to be jaded by a lot of the political outcomes. And so I love what you guys are doing, trying to get more and more veterans involved in voting first and growing their political impact, and then running for office. And that's really where all the My Campaign Coach strategic partnership comes into place, because with our courses and with the work that we're doing to help educate people, it's been a particular passion of mine for a long time to reach out to veterans. It's a community where the intangibles that I want to see in elected representatives, from school board and dog catcher to the White House, that's a community where those things are found in spades. And so when I get to start talking to you and Oz and others about how we get veterans involved and be able to say, look, we'll donate our work that we're doing here at My Campaign Coach, our courses, to you guys to be able to hand out to veterans who need it to be able to run and win office, that really excites me. And so I'm stoked to get to work with you guys. And we're going to be donating a bunch of subscriptions, but folks got to apply to you guys to take advantage of them. But we're going to be donating a bunch of courses to you guys to be able to get in the hands of veterans so we can get some more rock stars running for public office and winning and getting in there as veterans to represent us.
That is awesome, Raz. In fact, actually, I'm not going to jinx it, but there is a great veteran running for office in Colorado who's already reached out to us and just wanted to talk about what Our Values is doing. And he is a candidate, and I am going to circle back and talk with him. And that's funny. I'm glad you got that out there, that you guys were going to donate, because I was going to call you out, Raz, and say how many services is My Campaign Coach going to provide to veterans? And I know of at least one potentially. And so we're excited about that, because we're back to what we were talking about just a little while ago. And that was this idea and that getting involved in the political process. When we were talking about this idea of candidates running for office, it's hard work, the blocking and tackling. But actually, here's where politics is easy, and I think you would agree with me on this one, Raz, on the volunteer side, on making a difference, because getting to know your local, state elected officials, and when we're talking United States senators and governors, it's a little bit different, but not really a lot different. So your city council members, your school board members, your state representative, these folks are easily accessible. You can pick up the phone and literally give them a call. You can interview them, especially when there's primaries or contested general election. To your listeners, pick up the phone. give both of them a call, or all of the candidates who are running for office. Talk to them. They will talk to you.
Yes.
Figure out who you want to support and give them an hour a week of your time going door to door, making some phone calls. Once they get into office, I know we were talking earlier about governors making high-profile political appointments to big donors. At the local level, a $10 contribution and an hour a week of volunteer time will get you the ear of your local elected officials, and you can make a huge difference and a huge impact doing that.
Well, and one of the cool things is, a lot of our, most of our listeners are people that are wanting to run for office or are currently, and there's few things that can help you more in your eventual run, whatever that may be, than exhibiting a servant's heart and stepping up to help strong conservatives in their election. We've talked to a bunch of people, a lot of the candidates that we've interviewed on here. That's exactly been their story. Looking at folks like Connie Burton, a state senator here, my state senator, her background, she helped for years in the trenches politically, helping elect people like Ted Cruz and Matt Rinaldi and a bunch of great rock stars here in Texas with no idea she would ever run herself. But the result of her having been in the trenches with these men and women for a long time was that, one, she knew a whole lot about campaigns because she lived it alongside these folks and got to see the mistakes and the wins up close. And then from there, she was able to also leverage a lot of favors that people had. They knew that she had helped them in their elections, and they wanted to return the favor when she ran. And so getting out there and working hard in the trenches is just good. It's good politics, as well as a good way to build good relationships.
Well, and thank you for closing the loop on that conversation, Raz, because a lot of times I start talking after years on the radio, I start talking and forget my eventual point.
Likewise, my friend.
That is, yes, for very little skin in the game, you can learn a lot about campaigns. So eventually, and to your point, Raz, you do the volunteer a little bit here, a little bit there. You start to understand that running for office is something that is very doable. But when you go from the volunteer side of things to the actual candidate side of things, you have to step up your game a tremendous amount. There is so much more that is required from the work side of things. But just that getting involved, it takes very little time, effort, and energy to get involved, to pay attention to the issues, and to get to know those individuals who are making decisions about your life, whether you know it or not. Politics has an interest in your life. So that's always my argument to people. They say, well, I don't want to get involved. I don't have an interest in politics. Well, guess what? Politics has an interest in you, whether it's what you pay to park when you go downtown, what you pay at the grocery store as far as taxes go, what you pay as far as taxes go at the pump, all the way up to big decisions in your life like healthcare.
Yep. Sadly, there's far too many areas of our lives where politics is deeply ingrained. And I know in some parts of the country, it comes down to what type of bag you got to pay for to put your groceries in. And so we're talking about government being way, way too big. And if we want to help shrink that, which I know is one of our shared passions, is shrinking the role of government in our lives day to day, then we need people who are willing to stand up and run. And we're obviously here to help make that happen. And now we're getting to work with the guys over at Our Values, Oz and Tom, to help prepare more candidates that are veterans in order to step up and step into the ring in a new way, that are looking for a second service opportunity. So before we go on to the campaign advice side, I'll just tell folks, look, if you're specifically a veteran, or if you know veterans, make sure they go to our-values.com and check out what Tom and Oz are doing, because we need to be helping register more vets. And my campaign coach is going to be helping by donating. I think we're going to start out donating about $15,000 worth of courses to you guys, and helping to try to get some good people taking those courses and running for office this next cycle.
That is awesome, Raz. Can't thank you enough for that, my campaign coach. And like I said, we're just getting started. We're just getting off the ground. But you know how this works, Raz. You come across people who are passionate, who want to make a difference, especially veterans. and that's unique. And you and I have talked about this before. Veterans are unique individuals. They understand purpose. They understand how to accomplish things. They are task-oriented. They are mission-oriented. And you couldn't ask for greater people to run for office. Service is obviously in their heart. Nobody registers or nobody enlists in the military to get rich. I've got my oldest son is a Marine right now. If I told you what he got paid, and I know you know what they get paid,
yeah.
And
Not
most
much.
Americans don't. And the fact that he is off having to buy some of his own equipment based on his specialty and where he is, spends money out of his own pocket to make sure he's completely and totally outfitted. These are men and women who do it because they believe in something bigger than themselves, greater than themselves. And for you guys at My Campaign Coach to offer services to help those individuals out who want to run for office is totally awesome. Thank you.
Well, it's our pleasure. I mean, I love getting this stuff in the hands of good people that are able to go do something with it. And, when I think about combat veterans and military veterans who are rock stars, two immediately come to mind, and I'm going to have both of them on the podcast here pretty soon. One's a guy named Representative Tony Tinderholt here in Texas. The other is Senator Brian Birdwell, and their stories are phenomenal. Both are guys that were in the military for quite a while, both Army, and Brian Birdwell, he was actually the closest survivor at the Pentagon to the point of impact on 9/11. Burned badly, had an incredible story as far as his road to recovery, and ended up was one of the first guys that I ever met when I was doing political training, and he's now a state senator here for a couple terms here in Texas. And Tony Tinderholt, the other side, he was an Iraq combat veteran, and they're both down there in Austin doing rock star work, and are both real credits to the veteran community and the conservative community. And I want to see more and more people stepping up that are willing to do that. And we're dedicated to providing the education that we can. And I appreciate you guys helping to highlight their value that they bring to the table. Let's kind of move on from that and talk a little bit about the lessons you've learned on the campaign side. What are some of those big lessons, from your time as a regent to running to being a consultant yourself? What are some of those things that these candidates need to be taken into account as they're getting ready to launch a campaign?
Don't lose.
That's it, boys. That's a wrap.
Yeah, it's all about winning, Raz. I used that phrase earlier, and it's interesting because people who have run for office, winners and losers, both know exactly what I am talking about when I say it's winner take all. And if you haven't had your name on the ballot, you're like, yeah, obviously it's winner take all. But the high you feel from a victory to the gut-wrenching loss you feel, it's like a kick in the stomach on election night if you don't win. And it really is. And I've had two. I'm not even going to talk about my wins for the Board of Regents. But in 2010, when I ran for Congress, I did not realize and going back to your conversation that you were referencing a little bit a few minutes ago with former Congressman Jim Ryan, Drew Ryan, Ned Ryan, their dad, good friends to you and me both, the fundraising side of it. And it was just candidates will find anything and everything to distract themselves from running a campaign or from fundraising. What are you doing this morning? Well, I'm on Twitter because I can reach, so many more people on Twitter, but we don't have the funds to run the campaign. So don't get me wrong. You can win campaigns without as many dollars as your opponent, but typically the Eric Cantors of the world will more often than not win. Insurgent campaigns do win, and they are successful, and you do see grassroots movements like that. But the reality of it is 95% of campaigns across this country, dollars matter. They're important. when we say blocking and tackling, we're talking about picking up the phone in the morning, depending on what your budget is. And so we work back, as I'm sure you've talked with people, Raz, we work back from election day. How many votes do you need in order to win? You definitely need to have your analysis right. You're not just making stuff up. That's when I know a candidate is serious, when I ask them, how many votes do you need in order to win, whether it's primary, whether it's general election, and then start analyzing their budget backwards for voter contact, direct mail, so again, depending on the size of the race, where the race is, all the way back to from the day you announce. And so maybe you need 10,000 votes to win and your budget is $50,000 and you've got a 6-month window. I need to know what your fundraising limits are. How many days a week or how many hours a day, every day a week are you dedicating to fundraising? And at that point, we know whether or not a person has a realistic idea of what it is going to take, because you can't go out there and not have a way to communicate to the voters. So in 2010, I was that distracted candidate. I had worked with them before, always disliked working with them because it was always a question every month whether or not staff would get paid, whether we'd be able to send out our direct mail. But I allowed myself to fall into that trap. And I got beat, and I got beat badly, and it is what it is. And in 2016, when I ran, we checked all of the boxes, and we raised the money. Like I said, I raised the money. I dedicated myself every day, 3 hours a day. I'd start at 7 o'clock in the morning, calling my friends on the East Coast. By the time I got to 8 o'clock in the morning, my time in Colorado, I was calling my friends in the Midwest. And by the time 9 o'clock rolled around, I was calling my friends here in Mountain Standard Time Zone. And then later in the afternoon, I'd call my friends on the Pacific Coast. And so it was the getting down to it and doing everything that needed to be done. I lost a Republican primary in 2016 by 300 votes. And I appreciated what you said earlier, Raz, about knock on one more door. And unfortunately, my lesson in 2016 was we had the window set up. I made my phone calls every single day. I hit my numbers every single day on doors knocked. But guess what? Sometimes those numbers aren't right. And you know what? We would hit the numbers at 45 minutes before the sun set, and we would wrap and call it a day. And guess what? Over the course of 3 months of going door to door, if you want to take those 5 days a week during the week, those 45 minutes when we would hit the numbers early and multiply that over how many more doors we could have knocked, how many more voter contacts we could have had, we would have won. I would have won that race. But we got so caught up, and I did. You get so caught up in the formulas, and the formulas should work, and they do work most of the time. But guess what? Doing that little bit extra. So it was kind of I know you meant it as a general comment, Raz, when you were talking about knocking one more door, but it was a bit of a stinging rebuke of me. And I take ownership of that. I have to take ownership of it.
Well, I mean, I'll tell you, the whole reason why that sticks out in my mind is because I had the same type of loss. The first election I got involved in, we lost by 12 votes. And it was on a recount. It was like 70 votes election night, came down to 12 votes. And I knew as a 10-year-old kid that was out knocking doors for this lady, that if you'd have told me on the day of election that 13 more votes sends this lady to Austin, I mean, any of us on the campaign could have made that happen. And so it's even easier for me because I just think about that loss. I'm like, man, I didn't even have to think about adding up days over months and the margin that made. I was like, I could have just found it if they'd told me that on election day. And that stuck with me. That's one of those things where every election cycle, man, my goal is always in that short window of time between the polls closing and the early votes starting to come in, I want to be able to stop back from whatever polling location I'm coming back in, sunburned and sweaty and dirty from, stop at a gas station, wash my face and look in the mirror and just be like, you know what, I did everything I could. And that's the only way that I'm going to be able to sleep well at night is if I know that I can say the affirmative answer to that. And that's the only way you can sleep well with a loss, in my experience, because there's two types of loss. There's the one you could have stopped, and there's the one you had no way of stopping. And in cases like the one with my first election with Becky, I know I could have stopped that. And so that's what has really fueled me a lot moving forward to politics. It's not one that know that I could have done something different. And those are the ones that really stayed.
Well, yeah, and that's just it. And so and you've done this, Raz, we all do, we put campaign plans together and we put realistic benchmarks in there to measure candidates. And I fell into that trap. I hit every benchmark, but guess what? Maybe the benchmarks weren't high enough and they should have been higher. And so that's a lesson that I took away from it. And again, the thing, and we've all heard the saying, doctors make the worst patients, lawyers should not be advising themselves. Political consultants who eventually decide to run for office should have additional eyes on their plans.
Yes, sir.
And I had great people around me that I've worked with, volunteers that I have worked with over the years, and we've been in a lot of battles and campaigns together. I drafted the plan. Everybody looked at it. And if I sent you the plan, you would look at it and say, yeah, it's realistic, Tom, but and it was that mistake of not sending the plan to you, sending it to Drew Ryan, sending it to some of my other friends that I trust for honest feedback and assessment, because looking back at the end of the day, we hit all our benchmarks, but we still lost. So back to that, did you leave it all out on the playing field? What more could you have done? And you definitely don't want to look back on election night, whether it's 12 votes or 300 votes, because at that point in time, it's winner take all. It doesn't matter if it's 12 votes or 300 votes. You still lost. And when an election is that close, you definitely could have done more.
No doubt about that. It stings. There's nothing you can do about it once the ballot boxes close. So talk to me a little bit more about when you're starting a campaign, and you can either put on your candidate or your consultant hat, whichever you prefer at the moment. What are some of the first things you would recommend folks put together, whether it's systems or process? What are some of the first things you tell a candidate they need to be doing?
Well, we're back to always start backwards to from election day to the day you are going to announce. It's that idea of, do you even understand what is involved? And that first understanding comes from who votes, how many votes is it going to take to win, and how do we get to that benchmark? So it's 10,000 votes in order to win. That means we've got to talk to 10,000 voters plus some, because not everybody is going to vote for us. So it's that analysis of, do you have a base in which to launch from, especially on the conservative Republican side? Do you have realistic expectations in place, meaning of yourself? Do you understand what it's going to take in order to raise the money that's needed? Are you willing to do the hard work, the door-to-door, some of those other things? Because my first conversation with any candidate, Raz, is to intimidate them, because I don't believe most candidates have realistic expectations. I do my best. I
do the same thing.
Try to scare them and intimidate them from running for office. If after the first time we meet, you come back to me and say yes, then you've cleared that first hurdle and that first threshold. But I also think candidates need to have realistic expectations. And I try and get them to put everything in writing and what those benchmarks are. So if that first fundraising quarter's goal is 50,000 and you raised 44,000, that's pretty close. We can explain that away, but if that first quarter's fundraising goal was 50,000 and you raised $5,000, you have wildly unrealistic expectations, and that's when the excuses start, and that's when the paper comes out that says you were committed to doing X, Y, and Z. You obviously did not do X, Y, and Z. You are on a pathway to not only embarrass yourself, but the people, your friends, your family, and the volunteers who are out there. And that's another favorite line I like to use with candidates. Volunteers are willing to sacrifice their time. They're volunteers. They're not getting paid on your behalf, but you're not willing to repay them by doing what you need to do. Right. Making the fundraising calls, going door to door. You have unrealistic expectations of other people. It's that parent who says, do as I say, not as I do. And if you're not willing to repay volunteers by putting in the hours, then you need to back away from the race. So,
well, and one of my favorite things to do when it comes to helping make sure they stay on track with that is setting very specific short-term goals. Because, if you set a quarterly goal and say, okay, we're getting at 50 grand, and you don't find out how badly they're underperforming until the end of that quarter, you can't do anything about it. And typically, you're by that point, the campaign's already done for. But if you set accurate weekly goals that people are agreeing to and holding each other accountable on a weekly basis, man, that means that after a week, if you've been slacking, I can tell you, okay, Tom, I told you last week you had to do 3 hours of phone calls, and you only logged 30 minutes. And that's not going to get the job done. So get with it this next week. And it helps to be able to help push them on and make sure they're sticking on the right path on a daily and weekly basis to make sure that those habits are ingrained early and well.
Yeah, absolutely. And so we're kind of back to the mistake that I made in 16, and you're 100% right, Raz, in that they have to be daily goals. And having been in the restaurant business, we inventory food every single day, and there's a reason why you're inventorying every single day and tracking everything, because you want to be on top of it from a sales standpoint, from are we wasting food and keeping the efficiencies in it. And the idea, back to my big mistake in 2016, we had daily goals and we hit those. And so it's that extra 45 minutes that we didn't put in. So it's that healthy balance of, yes, you can have those daily goals in place, but candidates need to dig a little bit deeper than they think they can go. But the one you just highlighted, the one who's got the goal of 3 hours a week of making phone calls and hits 30 minutes, has unrealistic goals. And by the same token, the guy who hits his 3 hours of calls on Monday before 10 a.m. and then shuts it down until the next Monday, it's time to reevaluate him, because that's obviously a guy with fire in the belly, or a lady with fire in the belly, that needs to be unleashed and pointed in the right direction.
Well, I think that's a really good mistake to get to point out here. I'm very sorry you discovered it, but it's a really valuable one for our listeners to hear, because frankly, that's not one that comes up very often. It's not very often that you have the candidate that's going to knock out those metrics early and have more time at the end, because this wasn't because you set low benchmarks or unrealistically low benchmarks that you could just easily hit and jump over. You were working your butt off, and it just turned out that you needed to work a little bit harder and turn that time into actual campaign contacts. So, it's a difficult problem to find yourself in, because it requires you to be doing a whole lot of work, but it's tragic because of the end result there. So if you're setting those metrics for yourself, make sure you're reaching high, and if you're regularly beating them, then maybe set some higher ones for yourself. It's like somebody that's training for a race, and whatever their benchmark is, they keep beating it every time they go out. Well, that's probably a sign that you need to have some tougher benchmarks set for yourself along the way. There's something about those that you're overperforming, so move the mark for yourself a little bit.
And one other thing that you said about that, and it's interesting because the benchmark we missed was on the door-to-door. Obviously, when you're talking about 300 votes in a local state legislative race, and to just draw an image for you, it is a very densely populated area. So it's not a rural area where it made door-to-door and face-to-face contact difficult and challenging. So it was doable. And the interesting thing, and we're back to kind of some of those blocking and tackling ideas. And here's the ultimate one, especially in local races. Obviously, this is much different when you're talking statewide in Colorado or Texas for governor or for a Senate candidate, but at the local level for city council, for the state legislature. If somebody knocks on the door, more often than not, if it's a volunteer, the person at the door is going to listen. They'll be very nice. Mm-hmm. But if it is the candidate themselves, they are much more engaged. And people tend to vote for people, one, that will listen to them, and then secondly, people that they like and that they feel like will do a good job of representing them. And that's a frustrating thing for me, especially on smaller local races, Raz, is individuals who won't do the door-to-door work. Mm-hmm. Because volunteers can go out there again, but it's not the same impact. And a candidate who will just sit there and listen to individuals, answer their questions, be polite, respectful. They'll listen to what your campaign speech is while you're running for office. More often than not, candidates who will spend the time going door to door, who know what doors to knock on. That's important. You need to knock on people's vote and likely to vote for you. But more often than not, you'll walk away with that vote.
Now, you could not be more right. And that's one of those things that I'd really try to hammer home to folks is like, look, when you're talking about going out and knocking door to door, you know it's powerful. That just stands out for itself. But the closer the relationship with the candidate, the more powerful that's going to be as an ambassador, right? And that means that ultimately the candidate themselves is their best ambassador, or I sure as heck hope they are, because if they're not, we got a problem. But beyond that is the closer family, the spouse, the kids, the brothers, the cousins, the best friend from college. The longer and the more intimate the relationship with you, the better an ambassador they're going to be. It just kind of moves out concentrically. And so volunteers are great, and paid walkers can even be very good, depending on how conversant they are and how good they can communicate. But at the end of the day, nothing gets the job done better than having a candidate show up at my door and shake my hand and say thank you for this time and listen to me as I'm talking about my frustration. I mean, those are all things you can't replicate with anybody else. And it's a huge benefit. I've talked multiple times about, Brian Bird, who's a new city councilman here in Fort Worth, was one of our previous guests. He went through and he knocked every municipal household in his district, every municipal voting household. And I was personally helping with a lot of the get out the vote during that race. And the thing I heard every single time when I talked to one of those supporters was they told me, oh yeah, I know Brian. It wasn't, oh, I met him, oh, he knocked on my door, oh, got to ask him a question one time. He's like, I know him. And those brief minutes or moments that they got to talk with Brian on their doorstep in their front yard, he listened to them, he asked them a couple questions, and he shared their concerns. And the result of that was they felt they knew his character, and there was no question from that point on who they were voting for. And so if you're a candidate and you can't find time to go do the door knocking and do the fundraising, do the dollar for dollars, you're just not going to get the job done. And you really should plan more time for that. Find some people that'll hold you accountable and just get it done. Now, Tom, as we're kind of moving towards wrapping up here, what are some final bits of advice? We've really hammered home the need to knock doors and make phone calls. What are some other closing words of wisdom you might have for candidates?
Stay on message.
Absolutely.
Stay on message. It is So easy. I can't believe, and I can't pronounce his name. I never can pronounce his name. It was just shocking to me. Trump's second communications guy after Spicer, the Mooch, when he said you can't trust reporters. And I'm like, well, yeah, that's campaign 101. That goes, I learned that lesson back in 1992. But you know what? When I say stay on message and you can't trust reporters, for the most part, reporters are just doing a job, especially at a local level. They're good people, well-intentioned. And I don't know what it's like in Texas, but here in Colorado, because traditional print media is dying, you have a lot of young folks coming in just fresh out of college, and they are struggling to get the right questions out in a lot of cases. And so when I say stay on message, my big point to candidates is you don't have to answer the question that is asked. You answer the question that you want asked. You are responsible for the message. Now, when you get a little bit more seasoned political reporter, they will attempt to, and it will come across as if they are befriending you. They are very friendly. They're asking about the family, the kids, everything else is conversation. And that's how they lull you to sleep. And then they casually introduce politics into the equation. And now all of a sudden you're just blathering and talking, and you're not on message, and you're not controlling the narrative. Reporters don't have that much space in the article, and if you're not concise and on message and repeating the same message over and over again, they'll take what they want out of a conversation, and it's not necessarily what you want in the paper or online.
Nope, you're 100% right. It's the reporter's job to get information to put online. It's your job to make sure that what they get from you is what you want to be published. And if you're not being repetitive, if you're not thinking in advance about what you want to say, then it's gonna be a whiff, and worse, it may cause some significant harm to the campaign. For more information on that, you can go back and listen to the Alice Stewart episode. She does work with CNN. She was Senator Cruz's communications director, press secretary for a while. Has some awesome insight as far as how to do a lot of dealing with the media. But Tom, it's a very good point. Stay on message. Where can folks go to find out more about you and our values and what you and Oz Geist are doing together to help veterans?
Well, it's interesting because by the time the podcast plays, Raz, people should be able to just go to ourvalues.com and it'll take them right to the website. You know, it's funny because I do not only consulting for political campaigns, but for businesses. And it seems like the number one rule to starting a company anymore is finding the right name for your company. And that means you go to the internet before you start anywhere, because if the domain name isn't available, you need to change the name of the company. Right. So the first website for our values is ROUR-values, VALUES.com. We were able to secure the Our Values domain without the hyphen in the middle, and our tech guys should have that populating and pointing to the Our Values website here in the next 48 hours. So ourvalues.com or r-values.com, depending on when the podcast plays.
Fantastic. Well, Tom, I really appreciate your time. It's great to be able to hear from all the different parts of your background. You get to get the perspective of a candidate, of a consultant, of somebody that's won and lost campaigns. It's really a wealth of knowledge, and I appreciate your sharing with us today. And I'm stoked to get to work closely with you and Oz as we're helping try to get more veterans involved in voting, in politics, and in running for office. So thank you for the opportunity to do that. Everybody that's listening and downloading the podcast, I really appreciate you guys sticking with us every week. It's a blast from my perspective, and I love getting to provide these interviews for everybody to listen to. So keep giving me feedback. If you get a chance to give us a review, that'd be great. And we'll talk to you guys again next week.
Please subscribe and rate us on iTunes to help spread the word. We'll be back with you next week with more campaign insights from My Campaign Coach.